The late spring air in Serene Meadows, a sprawling, meticulously planned community, usually carried the cloying sweetness of blooming azaleas interwoven with the sharp, clean scent of freshly mown grass. A suburban perfume. David Miller, a senior wildlife enforcement officer for the state, had over time come to grudgingly appreciate. His wife, Susan, a compassionate pediatric nurse, and their bright, resilient 8-year-old daughter, Lily, had chosen this enclave for its lauded school system and the pervasive, if somewhat manufactured, promise of a safe, nurturing environment. Lily, who navigated the world with the cheerful clatter of her bright pink forearm crutches, due to a congenital condition affecting her lower limb mobility, particularly adored the Rainbow Park. This wasn't just any playground. It was a small, thoughtfully designed jewel within Serene Meadows, a testament to inclusive design. It boasted wider, gently sloped pathways, adaptive swings that could accommodate wheelchairs or provide extra support, and a plethora of sensory play areas. For Lily, and for many other children with diverse needs, Rainbow Park was more than just a place to play. It was a joyful, accessible haven, a place where limitations seemed to melt away under the warm sun. However, the carefully cultivated serenity of Serene Meadows often found itself fractured not by external threats, but by the discordant actions and venomous pronouncements of one Millicent Blackwood. Millicent Blackwood didn't just live in Serene Meadows. She reigned over it, or so she believed, wielding the HOA covenants with the unyielding, icy precision of a guillotine, transforming the children's sanctuary of Rainbow Park into the primary target of her escalating campaigns of attrition. A woman whose late 50s seemed permanently etched in a mask of disapproving severity, her posture ramrod straight, her eyes perpetually scanning for infractions real or imagined. Millicent was the self-crowned, undisputed matriarch of the Homeowners Association. She interpreted existing rules with a draconian severity that brooked no appeal, and when the thick binder of regulations failed to explicitly prohibit something that offended her delicate sensibilities, she possessed an uncanny ability to invent new unwritten ones on the spot. Behind cupped hands and weary sighs, many residents referred to her simply as that HOA Karen, or more descriptively, the Blackwood Blight, terms whispered with a potent cocktail of fear, resentment, and grudging awe at her sheer audacity. Millicent resided in a large, ostentatiously maintained colonial house, its pristine white paint and perfectly symmetrical landscaping a stark contrast to her increasingly disordered psyche. Crucially, her property directly overlooked Rainbow Park. And it was this vibrant, joyful space, and the children who dared to fill it with laughter, that had become the singular obsessive focus of her recent and increasingly unhinged ire. Her litany of complaints to the HOA board, often CCing a vast swathe of the neighborhood in lengthy vitriolic emails, was endless and imaginative. She railed against the excessive grating noise of children laughing and squealing with delight, conveniently forgetting the joyful sounds her own children, now long grown and conspicuously absent from her life, had once made. She decried the unsightly, garish appearance of the specialized, brightly colored play equipment, muttering about how it disrupted the aesthetic harmony of the community. She even lodged formal complaints about the inappropriate and suspicious loitering of parents and caregivers, as if their watchful presence were somehow nefarious. Her proposed solutions to these perceived outrages ranged from the absurdly restrictive, demanding strict limited time slots for park use segregated by age, and she once hinted decibel level, to the openly hostile, including repeated calls for the removal of certain adaptive equipment she personally deemed aesthetically displeasing and unnecessary coddling. Each increasingly bizarre proposal was met with polite but firm and increasingly weary resistance from David Susan and a growing coalition of other parents who valued the park's inclusive spirit and its profound importance to their children. Millicent's frustration, her sense of her authority being undermined, had been visibly palpably mounting a pressure cooker nearing its explosive limit. The previous week, during a particularly vibrant Saturday afternoon play session at Rainbow Park, where at least a dozen families had gathered to enjoy the sunshine, Millicent had stood on her elevated porch, a silent, glowering sentinel, her arms crossed her face, a mask of thunderous disapproval. Later that evening, she had unleashed a scathing multi-page email to the HOA board, once again CCing nearly every resident in Serene Meadows, detailing the uncontrolled licentious revelry and the clear contemptuous disregard for those residents who seek and are entitled to peace, quiet, and contemplation. She possessed a peculiar, almost fetishistic fondness for what she termed her natural back garden, a somewhat overgrown, unkempt, and vaguely menacing patch of land that backed directly onto a small, dense wooded preserve. She often spoke with a misplaced sense of profundity about the delicate balance of nature, usually in contexts that strongly implied human children, especially lively, joyful ones, were a disruptive, unwelcome force actively upsetting this sacred equilibrium. This particular Tuesday afternoon was bathed in the warm, inviting glow of late spring. Susan, having finished her shift at the hospital, had taken Lily to Rainbow Park directly after school. Lily, her bright pink crutches flashing like cheerful beacons, was determinedly, joyfully making her way across the soft, impact-absorbing surface towards the accessible spinner, a contraption of cunning design that allowed children of all abilities to experience the dizzying thrill of centrifugal force. Her laughter, pure and unrestrained, echoed through the park as she anticipated the fun. Several other children were already there, some on the swings, others clambering over the jungle gym, their happy shouts and calls creating a vibrant, joyful symphony of youthful exuberance. David was due to meet them shortly. He'd managed to finish his shift documenting a recent poaching incident a little early, and was eagerly looking forward to an hour of pushing Lily on the swings, hearing about her day, and simply basking in her infectious happiness. The first piercing indication that this idyllic afternoon was about to shatter into a million terrifying pieces was a shrill, high-pitched scream. Not a scream of playful delight, but one of pure, unadulterated, visceral fear. It was followed almost instantly by another, then a cacophony of panicked shouts from parents. Susan, who had been engrossed in conversation with another mother, Maria Sanchez, near the park, benches her own daughter, Sophia, playing nearby, whirled around her heart, instantly seizing in her chest. Her blood ran cold, a sudden icy dread gripping her. There, near the base of the brightly colored, child-friendly slide, coiled with an air of deadly reptilian stillness, its triangular head raised slightly, was a snake. And then her horrified gaze darted further, and she saw another, its patterned body partially concealed beneath the platform of the adaptive swing set Lily had been so eagerly heading towards only moments before. Their patterned skin, a disturbing mosaic of muddy browns and tans, was chillingly, unmistakably distinctive. Copperheads. Venomous. Deadly. Chaos erupted. A wave of pure primal panic swept through the small gathering. Parents, their faces contorted with terror, snatched up their children, screaming warnings, their voices raw with fear. Lily, frozen in her tracks, midway between the park gate and the now menacing spinner, looked utterly terrified, her small, usually animated face ashen, her wide eyes fixed on the unfolding horror. She understood danger. She had a keen awareness of her own physical vulnerabilities, and the raw, unbridled panic in the adult voices was an unmistakable clarion call of imminent peril. Susan, despite the icy tendrils of fear constricting her own throat, reacted with the ingrained swiftness of a seasoned nurse. "Lily, don't move a muscle. Stay right there, baby," she yelled, her voice, though trembling, managing to cut through the rising hysteria. She started moving towards her daughter, her eyes frantically scanning the ground, the wood chips the base of every piece of equipment, terrified of what other horrors might be lurking unseen in the dappled afternoon shadows. Maria gets Sophia and the others back towards the street. At that precise critical moment, David's state-issued Ford Explorer pulled up to the curb. He'd heard the first scream from a block away, a sound that had bypassed his ears and gone straight to his gut, clenching it into a tight, painful knot. Years spent dealing with unpredictable wildlife, dangerous poachers, and even more unpredictable, sometimes violent humans had honed his instincts to a razor's edge. He was out of the vehicle before it had fully shuddered to a stop, his senses on high alert, his eyes already sweeping the scene, assessing, analyzing, categorizing threats. He saw the raw panic on the parents' faces, the children being frantically pulled away, and then he saw Susan, her arm outstretched, gesturing frantically, her finger jabbing towards the play structures. And then his blood turned to ice. He saw the snakes, not just snakes, copperheads, in a children's playground. His professional training drilled into him over countless hours, and reinforced by years of field experience, slammed into place, overriding the initial overwhelming surge of paternal fear for Lily, who was, thank God, still near the entrance, a relatively safe distance from the immediate slithering threat. "Everyone stay back," David commanded, his voice a deep, authoritative roar that sliced through the chaos, imbued with the calm, unwavering authority of someone accustomed to taking control in life-or-death situations. "Susan, get Lily and the other children across the street to the far sidewalk. Now, someone call 911 immediately. Report multiple venomous snakes in a public playground. Request animal control and paramedics as a critical precaution." Kordasum. Parents desperate for direction, their own panic momentarily quelled by his decisive command, scrambled to comply, shepherding their terrified children away from the contaminated zone. David, meanwhile, was already moving not with reckless haste, but with a focused, predatory calm, his movements economical and precise. His eyes, trained to spot the subtlest signs of wildlife, quickly confirmed the species. 2 adult copperheads, quite large, possibly. A third he'd caught a fleeting glimpse of near the sandbox area. This was no accidental, unfortunate wandering of reptiles from the nearby preserve. Their placement was too specific, too deliberate, too targeted towards the most popular pieces of equipment. This was an act of calculated malice. This was deliberate. His official snake-handling kit, containing specialized tongs of varying lengths, heavy-duty Kevlar-lined gloves, and secure ventilated containment units, was, of course, in the locked equipment compartment of his work vehicle. But there was no time to retrieve it, not with active threats loose, and children potentially still in danger. His eyes scanned the periphery of the park, and he spotted a long-handled garden hoe leaning against the park's small maintenance shed, and beside it, a discarded heavy-duty cardboard appliance box. Improvised tools far from ideal, but they would have to do. The risk of waiting was too great. "Easy now, easy there, little ones." He murmured the words, more a calming mantra for himself than an attempt to communicate with the agitated reptiles, as he cautiously, slowly approached the first copperhead, the one coiled menacingly near the base of the slide. The snake, disturbed by the commotion, and his approach was agitated, its head raised in a classic defensive posture, its tail vibrating rapidly against the wood chips, creating a dry, buzzing sound. A silent, potent warning. With movements honed by years of practice, David used the flat edge of the hoe to gently, expertly guide and then lift the surprisingly heavy snake, his focus absolute, his breathing controlled. He carefully, painstakingly maneuvered it towards the waiting cardboard box, then with a final deft movement deposited it inside. He quickly found a discarded flat piece of plywood nearby and used it to secure the top of the box, weighing it down with a heavy rock. One contained. The second snake, the one near the adaptive swing set where Lily had been heading, was more alert, more aggressive already, in a tight defensive coil, its fangs visibly bared. This one would be trickier. This took more time, more patience, a delicate dance of advance and retreat. The air in the park was thick with an almost unbearable tension. The remaining parents and children watched in horrified, breathless silence from the safety of the opposite sidewalk. Susan held Lily tightly, Lily's small face buried in her mother's side, her own heart pounding like a drum against her ribs. But her faith in David's skill and his quiet competence was a small, desperate anchor in the terrifying maelstrom of the afternoon. After several tense minutes, he managed to coax, then firmly guide the second snake into another sturdy cardboard box. He'd located this one smaller, but still serviceable. He quickly secured it. 2 contained. He did a quick, thorough scan of the immediate area. He was almost certain he'd seen a third. His eyes, missing nothing, swept the entire playground, under benches in the decorative planting pots around the base of every single piece of equipment. And there it was, smaller than the others, perhaps a juvenile, almost perfectly camouflaged in the deep shade of a decorative granite boulder near the sand play area. This one, too, was carefully, expertly contained. 3 adult, venomous copperhead snakes, deliberately, maliciously placed in a children's playground. A playground specifically designed for and heavily frequented by children with disabilities. Children who might not be able to see them clearly. Children who might not be able to move away quickly enough, children like his Lily. A cold, hard, diamond-pure rage began to solidify beneath David's rigidly maintained professional composure. This wasn't just an act of recklessness. This was an act of profound, targeted evil. He thought of a case years ago, one that still haunted his quieter moments, a disgruntled farmer who had released a trapped bobcat near a rural school bus stop. A child had been mauled. David had arrived too late to prevent the tragedy, but the memory of that day, the sight of the child's injuries, the parents' uncomprehending grief had seared itself into his soul. Not again, he thought, a silent, ferocious vow. Not on my watch. Not my child. Not any child. He turned to the small, huddled group of shaken parents and children. Is everyone accounted for? Did anyone get bitten? Check yourselves. Check your children carefully. Thankfully, miraculously, everyone was physically unharmed, though deeply traumatized, the children crying, the parents pale and trembling. The distant wail of sirens was growing louder now, resolving into the approaching sounds of local police cruisers and an animal control unit. David, oh my God, David, who would do something like this? Susan asked, her voice trembling, laced with disbelief and horror, as she rushed to his side, Lily still clinging to her. This is monstrous. It's beyond comprehension. David's gaze, cold and hard as flint, drifted inexorably towards Millicent Blackwood's pristine white house, its windows like vacant eyes staring down at the scene of chaos. He saw a distinct twitch of the curtains in an upstairs window. She'd been watching. He'd bet his career, his life on it. Her incessant, venomous complaints, her escalating animosity towards the park and the children who used it, her almost pathological obsession with control, and her twisted interpretation of order. It all clicked into a single, horrifying, undeniable picture. I have a sickeningly clear idea, Susan, he said grimly, his voice low and dangerous. A very, very clear idea, as the uniformed police officers began to secure the area with crime scene tape and gently take initial statements from the distraught parents. David conferred briefly, but pointedly, with the arriving animal control supervisor, a colleague he knew well. He ensured the contained snakes would be handled appropriately, logged meticulously as evidence, and transported securely. Then, without a word to anyone else, he walked his stride, long and purposeful, directly towards Millicent Blackwood's front door. He was acutely aware that he was technically off duty, but a heinous, premeditated crime had been committed, a crime involving dangerous, protected wildlife deliberately used as a weapon to endanger children. This fell squarely, unequivocally, within his professional purview, especially concerning the illegal handling, transportation, and malicious release of protected and inherently dangerous native species. He knocked on the polished oak door, not a polite tap, but a hard, authoritative summons. After a calculated delay, Millicent opened the door, her expression a carefully constructed mask of mild, neighborly surprise, though her eyes, David noted with a surge of cold fury, held a faint, unmistakable glint of something else, a horrifying mixture of barely concealed fear and smug, triumphant satisfaction. "Why, Officer Miller, isn't it David?" she said, her voice a little too bright, a little too brittle. "Such a terrible commotion I've been hearing. Is everything quite all right at that park?" The slight contemptuous emphasis she placed on the word park was not lost on him. "No, Millicent, everything is very far from all right," David said, his voice perfectly level, yet with an undercurrent of chilled steel that could have cut glass. 3 adult copperhead snakes were just found on the playground equipment, placed there, deliberately. Millicent gasped, a theatrical, unconvincing hand flying to her chest. Oh my heavens, how perfectly dreadful children could have been grievously injured. Or worse, we really must do something far more proactive about the wildlife encroaching from that dreadful preserve. I've been saying it for years, haven't I? Her attempt at concern was so transparently false, it was insulting. David's eyes narrowed to icy slits. These snakes didn't just encroach, Millicent. They were put there, transported, released, and it's quite a remarkable coincidence, wouldn't you agree? After all your very public, very vocal complaints about the children, the noise, the park itself, after your repeated demands to have the park restricted, even dismantled. Are you accusing me of something, Mr. Miller?" Millicent asked, her voice suddenly turning sharp, defensive, a hint of her usual arrogance returning. "I find that suggestion highly offensive, utterly baseless, and frankly slanderous. I was in my home, as I always am at this time of day, tending to my correspondence and enjoying a cup of tea." "Were you now?" David pressed his gaze unwavering. "Because Mrs. Henderson from directly across the street, a woman with excellent eyesight and no reason to lie, happened to be tending her roses earlier this afternoon. She saw you, Millicent, near the park's perimeter fence, the one bordering the wooded area. She said you were carrying a distinctive lidded bucket, blue with a white lid, she recalled, and wearing heavy gardening gloves. You seemed to be looking around quite a bit, she noted rather furtively, as if to make very sure no one was watching you." Millicent's carefully constructed composure flickered, then visibly cracked. A dull, mottled flush began to creep up her neck, betraying her agitation. I was merely disposing of some accumulated garden waste in the designated community green bin, which, as you know, is located near the park entrance. The lid was simply to prevent spillage of leaves and twigs." Her voice lacked conviction. Her eyes darted nervously past him. Garden waste that hissed and slithered, Millicent, garden waste that looked remarkably like 3 venomous copperhead snakes. David countered his voice, dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "Millicent, I am a senior state wildlife enforcement officer. My sworn duties include but are not limited to investigating the illegal possession, unlawful transportation, and malicious release of dangerous and protected wildlife, especially when such actions willfully endanger the public. What happened in that park today wasn't just a reckless act of stupidity, Millicent. It was a calculated, premeditated attempt to cause serious bodily harm, potentially fatal harm to innocent children. Disabled children, Millicent. Children like my daughter Lily." His voice broke slightly on his daughter's name, the raw pain and fury momentarily eclipsing his professional demeanor. Her eyes darted nervously past him again towards the flashing blue and red lights of the police cars still clustered at the park entrance. The sound of official radios crackled in the otherwise quiet afternoon. This is This is outrageous, preposterous. You have absolutely no proof. This is harassment. Oh, proof can be found, Millicent. It always can when one knows where to look. David said, his voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial whisper, though its menace was unmistakable. Residue in that distinctive blue bucket, perhaps. Microscopic scales, traces of venom, soil analysis from your wild garden that might just match the soil and leaf litter found on the snakes. Maybe even security footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera that you weren't aware of. We live in an age of pervasive surveillance, after all. And then, of course, there's motive, which you've so generously, so publicly provided us with over these past few months. He took a deliberate, almost imperceptible step closer, invading her personal space, his taller frame looming over her. The act of intentionally maliciously releasing venomous reptiles in a public place, especially one designed for and frequented by vulnerable individuals, constitutes multiple serious felonies. Millicent. We're talking aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Yes, snakes can be considered weapons in this context. Multiple counts of reckless endangerment of a child, and depending on the full extent of the evidence of your intent, potentially even attempted murder. And that's before we even get to the slew of very serious state and federal wildlife violations, each carrying hefty fines and potential jail time. Millicent began to tremble visibly, her face paling to a sickly greenish hue. The mask of indignant, affronted propriety was shattering, falling away in jagged pieces. You can't. You wouldn't. I'm a respected member of this community. Oh, I can and I will, Millicent. David stated, his voice now carrying its full, undeniable official weight, the authority of the state behind every syllable. Millicent Blackwood, given the immediate and ongoing threat to public safety, the inherently dangerous nature of the wildlife involved the credible witness statement, placing you at the scene under highly suspicious circumstances, and my own professional assessment as a wildlife enforcement officer, I am officially detaining you on suspicion of committing multiple felonies, including but not limited to egregious violations of state wildlife codes pertaining to the illegal handling, unlawful transportation, and malicious release of venomous reptiles, and as a person of extreme interest in an ongoing criminal investigation into aggravated assault and attempted grievous bodily harm. You will come with me now to speak with the police detectives who are already on site and eager to interview you. They will undoubtedly have many questions. For instance, they will be extremely interested to know where precisely you acquired those copperheads and why you chose to unleash them on innocent children. He didn't touch her yet, but his stance, his unwavering gaze, his sheer physical presence were unequivocal. She was not going anywhere. He saw her eyes dart towards her garden shed. "Don't even think about it, Millicent," he said softly. "That bucket is evidence. Tampering with it now would just add obstruction of justice to your growing list of charges." Millicent seemed to deflate, all the fight, all the arrogance draining out of her like air from a punctured balloon. The smugness, the self-righteous fury were gone, replaced by a stark, visceral, all-consuming fear. The reality of her situation, the sheer crushing gravity of what she had done and what she now irrevocably faced, seemed to crash down upon her with the force of a physical blow. I demand a lawyer," she whispered, her voice hoarse, barely audible. "You will have every opportunity to speak to a lawyer, Millicent," David assured her grimly. "After you've been formally arrested by the responding police officers based on my testimony as a state wildlife officer, the statements from other eyewitnesses, and the evidence we are about to secure, and they will be obtaining a warrant to search your property, your house, your garden, your computer, for any and all evidence related to these heinous crimes." As if on cue, summoned by a quick, almost imperceptible hand signal, David had given moments before two uniformed police officers, a stern-faced sergeant and a younger patrolwoman, began walking purposefully up Millicent Blackwood's perfectly paved driveway. The game Millicent had to realize was comprehensively, irreversibly over. Millicent Blackwood, the self-appointed queen of Serene Meadows, the HOA Karen, who genuinely believed she was above reproach, who valued her own warped, twisted sense of order and control above the safety, the well-being, even the lives of innocent children, was about to face the full, unblinking, and unforgiving force of the law. She so readily, so gleefully weaponized against others for the most trivial of perceived infractions. The subsequent investigation was, as David had predicted, swift, thorough, and utterly damning. A search warrant was quickly obtained and executed. A lidded blue bucket, identical to the one Mrs. Henderson had described, was found hastily rinsed in Millicent's garden shed. But crime scene technicians, using specialized forensic techniques, still managed to recover trace evidence. Microscopic snake scales confirmed by the lab as belonging to the copperhead species, and minute particles of soil consistent with the soil and leaf litter from the specific area of the wooded preserve bordering her property where such snakes were known to den. Her computer history, meticulously analyzed by cybercrime experts, proved to be a goldmine for the prosecution. It revealed a chilling series of searches over the preceding weeks: how to catch copperhead snakes safely, are copperhead bites fatal to small children, legal penalties for releasing snakes, most discreet way to access Rainbow Park undetected, and most damningly evidence of encrypted communications with a shadowy online vendor specializing in the illegal trafficking of exotic and native wildlife. It turned out Millicent hadn't just stumbled upon the snakes. She had specifically sought out and purchased them from an illegal black market source, paying a premium for adult specimens, further underscoring her cold, calculated premeditation. Bank records confirmed a recent, untraceable cryptocurrency transaction matching the vendor's price. Neighbors previously intimidated into silence by Millicent's aggressive demeanor and her well-known litigiousness now came forward in droves, providing sworn statements detailing her escalating anger, her overt threats towards the park and its users, and her disturbing obsessive fixation on the children who played there. The case against her was not just airtight. It was a veritable fortress of irrefutable evidence. Millicent Blackwood was charged with multiple counts of attempted aggravated battery on a child with a deadly weapon, numerous counts of felony reckless endangerment, and a raft of serious felony wildlife crimes, including the illegal purchase, unlawful trapping, and intentional malicious release of dangerous venomous reptiles in a public area. Her defense attorney's desperate attempts to portray her as a misunderstood, eccentric elderly woman who merely wanted to gently scare the children into being quieter, or to encourage the HOA to take wildlife encroachment more seriously, were contemptuously dismissed by the seasoned prosecutor as pathetic, transparent, and deeply offensive lies in the face of the overwhelming evidence of her cold, calculating, malicious intent. The fact that her primary targets were children, many of whom had documented disabilities and limited mobility, amplified the public outrage and the legal condemnation. The trial became a grim focal point for Serene Meadows and the wider county community. David, his voice steady but filled with a barely suppressed righteous anger, recounted the events of that afternoon, his testimony precise and unshakable. Susan, her voice often thick with emotion, described the terror in the children's eyes, the panic of the parents, and the lingering trauma that continued to haunt their family. Other parents testified their stories, painting a consistent picture of fear, outrage, and profound relief that a greater tragedy had been averted. Lily, spared from the ordeal of testifying directly in open court, had her profound impact conveyed through the expert testimony of child psychologists who detailed the acute terror, the recurring nightmares, and the significant anxiety the incident had inflicted upon her and the other young victims. These experts patiently explained how such a traumatic event could have long-lasting psychological consequences, particularly for children already navigating existing vulnerabilities. Experts from the state wildlife services and medical professionals from the local hospital outlined in graphic detail the lethal potential of copperhead venom, especially for small children whose smaller body mass makes them far more susceptible to severe envenomation. During the defense phase, Millicent's lawyer attempted a desperate, last-ditch twist. They called a surprise witness a former neighbor of Millicent's from decades prior. This neighbor reluctantly testified that Millicent had many years ago tragically lost a younger sibling, a sister who had a significant intellectual disability, in a playground accident. The accident the neighbor vaguely recalled had involved the sister wandering off unsupervised and falling from a piece of equipment. The defense attorney tried to argue that this profound childhood trauma had warped Millicent's perception, leading to a pathological, if subconscious, resentment and fear directed towards disabled children and the places they played, suggesting a diminished capacity or an uncontrollable psychological compulsion. While this revelation sent a shocked murmur through the courtroom and added a tragic, disturbing layer to Millicent's already monstrous persona, painting her not just as evil, but as profoundly damaged, the prosecution on cross-examination deftly dismantled the argument. The prosecutor, a sharp, empathetic woman named Anya Sharma, acknowledged the tragedy of Millicent's past, but sternly pointed out that countless individuals suffer profound loss and trauma without resorting to victimizing innocent children. A tragic past, Your Honor, may explain certain behaviors, Sharma argued passionately in her closing statement, but it can never ever excuse or justify calculated acts of terror and attempted murder against the most vulnerable members of our society. Ms. Taim, Blackwood made a choice. She chose malice. She chose violence. She chose to weaponize her pain against innocent children. The jury, after deliberating for less than 6 hours, returned with their verdict. Guilty on all major counts. The courtroom was silent as the foreperson read, each finding her voice clear and unwavering. Millicent Blackwood, who had maintained a facade of stoic indifference throughout most of the trial, finally seemed to crumple her face ashen, her eyes vacant. The judge, a venerable woman, known for her compassion, but also for her fierce protection of children, did not mince words in her sentencing. Ms. Blackwood? She began, her voice resonating with a quiet, profound authority. Your actions represent a profound and sickening betrayal of communal trust, a horrifying disregard for the sanctity of human life, particularly the precious lives of vulnerable children. You meticulously planned and ruthlessly executed an act of terror. You weaponized nature itself, transforming creatures of the wild into instruments of potential death in a twisted, malevolent attempt to terrorize, injure, and potentially kill those you inexplicably deemed a nuisance. Your obsession with control, your vindictive and pathologically disproportionate response to perceived slights have led you to commit acts of breathtaking, almost unimaginable cruelty. This court, Ms. Blackwood, must send an unequivocal and resounding message that such depraved behavior will be met with the severest penalties our society can impose. Millicent Blackwood was sentenced to 20 years in state prison, with a mandatory minimum of 15 years to be served before any possibility of parole. She was also fined heavily, with substantial amounts designated for state wildlife conservation programs and the creation of a dedicated fund to support children with disabilities and their families within the county. Her assets, including her prized, meticulously maintained home overlooking Rainbow Park, were ordered to be seized by the state and sold, the proceeds directed to cover the substantial fines and to establish a victim compensation fund for the affected families, specifically to pay for ongoing therapy counseling and any other support services they might require in the aftermath of this horrific ordeal. The day Millicent Blackwood, stripped of her arrogance, her power, and her freedom, was led from the courtroom. In handcuffs, a palpable collective sigh of relief seemed to sweep over Serene Meadows. Rainbow Park, after being thoroughly swept multiple times by wildlife professionals and undergoing a community-led effort to enhance its fencing and install state-of-the-art security cameras, eventually reopened. It took a long time for the children, especially Lily, to feel completely, unreservedly safe there again. For months, shadows seemed to hold new menace, and every rustle in the bushes brought a fresh wave of anxiety. But they did return their laughter, at first tentative, then gradually more confident, slowly, bravely reclaiming the space, a poignant testament to their innate resilience and the community's quiet determination not to be cowed or defined by hatred and fear. Lily, in her own unique way, spearheaded a part of this healing. With Susan's help, she designed a new game for the park called Sunshine Guardians, where children would patrol for shadow monsters, imaginary ones this time, and declare areas all clear with cheerful shouts. It was her way of transforming fear into empowerment. David often watched Lily play in Rainbow Park, her bright pink crutches a familiar, vibrant flash of color as she navigated the slides and swings with her friends. The memory of that terrible, sun-drenched afternoon, the image of those coiled snakes, the raw terror in his daughter's eyes, would never fully fade. It would forever be a dark scar on his soul. But it was now overlaid with the profound, comforting knowledge that justice, however arduous the path, had ultimately prevailed. He had not failed this time. The ghosts of his past case felt a little less heavy. The HOA, thoroughly shaken and humbled by the scandal, underwent a complete and necessary overhaul, its new chastened board, focusing on genuine inclusivity, transparent governance, and the promotion of actual community welfare rather than the tyrannical enforcement of petty rules. Millicent Blackwood became a grim cautionary tale, a stark, chilling reminder of the insidious darkness that can fester and grow behind a carefully constructed facade of suburban respectability and of the unwavering courage it sometimes takes to confront that darkness head-on. Serene Meadows had faced a monster in its midst, a monster of its own making, in a way. And by standing together, by speaking truth to power, by refusing to be silenced or intimidated, they had ensured she could harm no one else. The delicate balance of nature, David knew, sometimes required decisive, courageous human intervention to protect the innocent from the truly venomous among them. The laughter in Rainbow Park, now a little more precious, a little more hard-won, was proof of that.